The birth of the Germanic tribes and their ancient origins, the shadows of the past. Of all the so-called barbarians Rome faced, none left a more enduring mark on history than the Germanic tribes. These fierce warriors, whose origins stretch back thousands of years, would ultimately shake the very foundations of the Western Roman Empire. But where did they come from? What forces shaped their culture, their beliefs, and their relentless defiance against Rome? This chapter delves deep into the primordial past, tracing the emergence of the Germanic peoples from the vast migrations of Indo-European tribes to the development of their distinct identity. Through archaeology, linguistics, and historical texts, we unravel a past that is as mysterious as it is transformative. The Indo-European migrations, the birth of a people. Before the Germanic tribes emerged as a dominant force, their ancestors were part of the great Indo-European migrations. The leading theory, the Kurgan hypothesis, suggests that the Proto-Indo-Europeans originated in the vast Pontic-Caspian steppe around 4500 BCE. These nomadic pastoralists, known as the Yamnaya, mastered horse domestication and introduced a wave of migrations across Europe and Asia, from steppe nomads to settled tribes. As the Yamnaya expanded, their language and culture fractured into various branches: Celtic, Italic, Slavic, and, of course, Germanic. By around 2000 BCE, the Proto-Germanic language began developing in the northern coastal regions of present-day Germany, Denmark, and southern Sweden. Here, the first elements of what we recognize as Germanic culture took root. These early societies differed significantly from the sophisticated urban centers of the Mediterranean. Instead of grand cities, they lived in scattered villages, bound by kinship and a warrior ethos that would later define their clashes with Rome. Their lifestyle was simple, yet deeply connected to the forests and rivers of northern Europe, shaping a resilient and resourceful people. The Germanic identity, culture, society, and warfare. Tacitus, the Roman historian, painted a vivid and often condescending picture of the Germanic peoples in his work Germanian, 98 AD. Though biased, his account provides invaluable insights into their social structure, economy, and martial traditions, a society built on strength and honor. Unlike the Romans, who built a vast empire with bureaucratic efficiency, Germanic tribes operated through a decentralized system. They were not a single nation but a mosaic of independent tribes such as the Suebi, Marcomanni, and Alemanni. Leadership was earned through valor in battle rather than noble birth alone. War chiefs who failed to deliver victories were quickly replaced. Warriors trained from a young age, learning to wield spears and shields in tightly knit formations. While Romans relied on heavy armor and disciplined legions, the Germanic tribes embraced speed, ferocity, and the element of surprise. They had little use for cavalry, as horses were rare and reserved for the elite. Instead, their strength lay in their unbreakable and relentless aggression on the battlefield. Religion and the gods of war. The Germanic pantheon bore striking similarities to later Viking mythology. Tacitus noted that they worshipped Mercury, Mars, and Hercules, though these were actually Woden as Odin, Tyr as Tyr, and Donar Thor. Religious practices involved animal and, at times, human sacrifices to appease the gods and ensure victory in battle. Sacred sites, often deep within dense forests, served as the center of these rituals. The first encounters with Rome, a glimpse of the future. The Germanic tribes first came into contact with Rome not as enemies, but as traders and mercenaries. Yet, it was inevitable that such vastly different cultures would clash. By the 2nd century BC, as Rome expanded northward, the first battles erupted. These initial skirmishes foreshadowed centuries of bloodshed that would culminate in the fall of the Western Roman Empire. The significance of early conflict. Rome saw the Germanic peoples as a threat but also as potential allies, an endless source of fierce warriors who could serve in their legions. However, the very traits that made them formidable fighters also made them unreliable subjects. Their loyalty was to their kin, not to a distant emperor. This realization would shape Rome's strategy of divide and control, a method that worked for a time but ultimately failed when figures like Arminius turned Rome's own tactics against them. A storm on the horizon. As the Germanic tribes grew in strength and confidence, their relationship with Rome teetered between cooperation and outright war. What began as small raids and border skirmishes would soon evolve into full-scale conflicts that threatened the mightiest empire the world had ever seen. The seeds of Rome's downfall had been planted, and the Germanic peoples were poised to claim their place in history. First clashes with Rome. From Ariovistus to Arminius. A collision of worlds. Imagine a world where two vastly different civilizations stand on the precipice of war. One is the mightiest empire the world has ever known, Rome, an unyielding force, with legions marching in perfect discipline, bound by law, order, and an insatiable hunger for expansion. The other is a land of untamed wilderness, home to fierce warriors who value freedom above all else. The Germanic tribes, scattered, unpredictable, and yet, in their own way, just as relentless as the Romans. For centuries, the Romans had battled Celts, Carthaginians, and Greeks, believing themselves invincible. But then, they met the Germanic peoples, and everything changed. From the catastrophic Cimbrian War to the cunning of Arminius, this chapter will unravel the first great clashes between Rome and Germania, battles that shaped the course of European history forever. Rome's first true test against Germania. Before the Germanic threat fully took shape, Rome was still occupied with Gaul. However, in 120 BC, a storm was brewing in the north. The Cimbrian Teutonies, two large Germanic tribes, began a mass migration southward. Their reasons remain debated. Some suggest climate change, others point to overpopulation or political strife. Whatever the cause, one thing was certain: the Germanic peoples were coming, and they would not be stopped easily. When these tribes entered Noricum, modern Austria, they clashed with the Romans for the first time. Initially underestimated, the Cimbrian Teutonies proved to be a formidable force. Unlike the Celts, who often fought in loose formations, the Germans displayed remarkable coordination. They annihilated the Roman army, Ariovistus 105 BC, in what became one of the worst defeats in Roman history, with over 80,000 soldiers lost. At this point, Rome was in crisis. Panic spread through the Republic, and many feared another sacking of Rome, reminiscent of what the Gauls had done centuries earlier. But salvation came in the form of Gaius Marius, a general who revolutionized the Roman military. Marius transformed the legions into a professional fighting force, adopting new training regimens and strategies. When the Germanic tribes finally turned south again, he was ready. In 100 to 101 BC, Marius decisively defeated the Teutonies at Aquae Sextiae and the Cimbri at Versailles, marking Rome's first major victory over the Germanic peoples. However, the lesson was clear: Germanic warriors were unlike any enemy Rome had faced before. The first Germanic warlord to challenge Rome. Fast forward to the 60s BC. While Rome continued to expand, another Germanic leader rose to prominence: Ariovistus of the Suebi. Originally an ally of Rome, Ariovistus had been invited to settle in Gaul as a counterbalance to Celtic tribes. But soon, he began to carve out his own kingdom, conquering vast swaths of territory. Enter Julius Caesar. In 58 BC, during his conquest of Gaul, Caesar saw Ariovistus not as a friend, but a threat. The Germanic king had amassed an army of 15,000 warriors and had grown too powerful for Rome's liking. Caesar, never one to tolerate rivals, demanded that Ariovistus withdraw. When the Germanic king refused, war became inevitable. The Battle of Vosges 58 BC was the first major confrontation between Rome and a Germanic warlord. Caesar's legions, disciplined and heavily armored, faced Ariovistus' warriors, who fought in tight wedge formations. Despite their ferocity, the Germans could not break the Roman lines. Caesar emerged victorious, forcing Ariovistus to retreat across the Rhine. Yet, this battle was just a preview of the bloodshed to come. Rome had won this encounter, but it had merely delayed the inevitable clash between the two civilizations. Augustus' dream of conquering Germania. With Julius Caesar's assassination in 44 BC, Rome entered a period of civil war. Eventually, Octavian, later Augustus, emerged as Rome's first emperor, bringing stability. Now, he set his sights on a new ambition, bringing Germania under Roman control. By 06 BC, Roman generals Tiberius and Drusus led expeditions deep into Germanic territory. They achieved several victories, subjugating tribes and establishing outposts. For a brief moment, Rome believed it had finally conquered Germania, but then came the greatest disaster in Roman military history: Teutoburg forest. The Roman-trained Germanic rebel. At the heart of the Teutoburg ambush was Arminius, a Carusi noble who had spent years serving in the Roman military. He had learned their tactics, their strengths, and, more importantly, their weaknesses. While Rome saw him as an ally, he secretly harbored a deep resentment, believing that Roman rule threatened the freedom of his people. When Governor Publius Quinctilius Verus was stationed in Germania, Arminius saw his opportunity. He convinced Varus that the Germanic tribes were loyal, luring the Roman legions into unfamiliar terrain. In 09 AD, as 3 Roman legions marched through Teutoburg forest, Arminius sprang his trap. Using the dense forest to their advantage, the Germanic warriors launched a relentless ambush. The Romans, unable to form proper battle lines, were slaughtered. 20,000 Roman soldiers perished in one of the most shocking defeats the empire had ever suffered. When Augustus heard the news, he was so devastated that he reportedly screamed, "Quinctilius Varus, give me back my legions." The consequences were enormous. Rome abandoned its ambitions of conquering Germania. Instead of expansion, the Rhine now became the empire's permanent northern border. The Germanic tribes had not only survived Rome's wrath, but had delivered a humiliation that would haunt the empire for generations. The unfinished struggle. The battles of Ariovistus and Arminius were just the beginning of a centuries-long struggle between Rome and the Germanic world. While Rome remained the dominant force, it now understood that Germania was unlike any other frontier. The Germanic tribes could not be easily conquered, nor could they be controlled. In the next chapter, we will explore the evolving relationship between Rome and Germania. While warfare remained constant, so too did diplomacy and trade. Roman influence seeped into the Germanic world, shaping their future even as the tribes prepared for their ultimate revenge, the downfall of Rome itself. The constant struggle, trade, diplomacy, and war with Rome. The thin line between war and peace. The Battle of Teutoburg Forest in 09 AD had left Rome reeling. 3 legions were annihilated, and the empire abandoned its dreams of turning Germania into another province. But did this mean an end to Roman-Germanic interactions? Far from it. In reality, the relationship between these two civilizations was far more complex than mere warfare. Rome, despite its wounds, never truly withdrew. The Rhine and Danube rivers became the empire's new frontiers, where legions stood guard against further Germanic incursions. But beyond military confrontation, Rome and the Germanic tribes found themselves entangled in diplomacy, trade, and uneasy alliances. For nearly 2 centuries, the relationship between Rome and the Germanic world became a delicate balancing act, sometimes peaceful, often violent, and always unpredictable. The Roman strategy: divide and control. The Germanic tribes, despite their victory at Teutoburg, remained divided. Unlike the centralized power of Rome, they lacked a unified political system. This gave the Romans an opportunity not through conquest, but through manipulation, bribes, treaties, and political games. Rome perfected the art of playing the Germanic tribes against one another. By offering gifts, money, and military aid to certain tribes, they ensured that Germania remained fractured. Some leaders eagerly took Roman support, seeing it as a means to strengthen their own rule against rival tribes. For example, the Carusi, under Arminius, had once fought Rome, but after his death, they fractured, with some members even seeking Roman help to fight other Germanic tribes. The Marcomanni, a powerful confederation, initially resisted Rome, but later became an essential ally in border security. This strategy of divide and rule worked for decades. Rome had no need to conquer Germania if it could keep the tribes too busy fighting each other. Trade across the frontier. Rome's unexpected reliance on Germania. While war defined much of their history, trade between Rome and the Germanic world flourished. Despite their cultural differences, both sides had something the other wanted. What Rome gave to Germania. Roman goods flowed into Germania through border settlements and trade routes. Some of the most coveted items included fine pottery and glassware. Archaeological finds show that Germanic elites treasured Roman craftsmanship, weapons and armor. Although Rome rarely armed the tribes, Germanic warriors occasionally acquired superior Roman-made swords and helmets. Coins. Many Germanic chiefs hoarded Roman coins, not just as currency, but as symbols of power. What Germania gave to Rome. Germanic lands were rich in natural resources that Rome needed. Amber, highly prized in Rome. This fossilized tree resin from the Baltic Sea was used in jewelry and decorations. Animal hides and furs, essential for Roman clothing and military gear. Slaves. Germanic tribes frequently captured prisoners from rival tribes and sold them to Rome, fueling the empire's massive slave-based economy. This exchange created a paradox. While Rome feared the Germanic tribes as warriors, it depended on them economically. Germania became an unofficial part of Rome's extended economic system, despite never being fully under its control. Germanic warriors in the Roman military. Not all Germans fought against Rome. Many fought for it. By the first 2nd centuries AD, Rome had begun recruiting Germanic warriors into its auxiliary forces. These men were not granted Roman citizenship but were paid and trained in the Roman way of war. The role of Germanic soldiers in the legions. Many Germanic warriors fought as auxiliaries, forming cavalry units or light infantry. They often served along the limes Germanicus, the fortified border zones where Rome stationed troops. Some Germanic fighters eventually rose to high ranks, integrating into Roman society. Ironically, the same Germanic warriors Rome trained would later turn against the empire, playing a key role in its downfall. The Marcomannic Wars 166 to 180 AD, a harbinger of Rome's future struggles. For decades, Rome's divide and rule tactics kept the Germanic world relatively stable. But in 166 AD, everything changed. A massive coalition of Germanic tribes, led by the Marcomanni, Quadi, and Sarmatians, launched an unprecedented invasion into Roman territory. Why did the Marcomanni invade? Historians believe a new external threat was pushing the Germanic tribes southward, likely pressure from the mysterious steppe nomads of the east, possibly the early Huns. Facing destruction, the Germanic tribes chose to move into Roman lands, rather than be crushed by their unknown enemy. Marcus Aurelius' brutal response. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius spent 14 years repelling the invasions. His campaign was one of the most grueling wars Rome had fought since the early days of the Republic. Rome suffered severe defeats early on, with Germanic forces reaching as far as Italy itself. Rome's legions adapted, learning to fight deep in Germanic territory, using counterinsurgency tactics. After years of relentless war, the Romans finally pushed the Germanic tribes back beyond the Danube. The aftermath, a new reality for Rome. Though Rome won, the war exposed a terrifying truth: the Germanic world was changing. Stronger, larger confederations were forming, unlike anything seen before. Rome's border was no longer secure, and the Germanic threat was far from over. The Roman-Germanic balance of power shifts. By the late 2nd century, it became clear that Rome was no longer dealing with small, scattered tribes. New super-tribes and coalitions were emerging. The rise of the Gothic and Frankish threats, the Goths, migrating from Scandinavia, began moving toward Rome's eastern frontiers. The Franks, a confederation of smaller tribes, began raiding deep into Gaul. The Alemanni, another powerful Germanic group, continuously tested Rome's defenses. This marked the beginning of the end for Rome's dominance. The once disorganized Germanic world was consolidating, and soon, it would launch the final blows that would shatter the empire. The calm before the storm. For centuries, Rome had dealt with the Germanic tribes through war, trade, and diplomacy. But by the 3rd century AD, the balance had shifted. The Germanic world was no longer just a collection of fragmented tribes, it was a rising power. In the next and final part, we will witness the fall of Rome itself. From the rise of the Goths, Vandals, and Franks to the fateful sack of Rome in 410 AD. We will explore how the Germanic peoples overcame the might of the empire and reshaped the history of Europe forever. The fall of Rome and the rise of the Germanic kingdoms. Introduction. The empire on the brink. By the 3rd century AD, Rome was no longer the unstoppable force it once was. The legions were stretched thin, civil wars weak, and the empire from within, and new enemies emerged on all fronts. Yet, among these threats, none were more persistent than the Germanic tribes. Once seen as disorganized barbarians, the Germanic peoples had adapted, learned, and evolved. No longer satisfied with raiding Rome's borders, they now sought something greater, a place than the empire itself. In this final chapter, we will explore how the Germanic peoples broke Rome's dominance, from the Gothic Wars to the sack of Rome, culminating in the collapse of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD. This is the story of how the so-called barbarians became the new rulers of Europe. The Gothic Wars, Rome's worst nightmare begins. By the late 3rd century, the Goths, a powerful Germanic confederation, had emerged as Rome's most formidable enemy. Unlike the scattered tribes of the past, the Goths fought as a disciplined and organized force. The crisis of the 3rd century and the first Gothic raids. Between 235 to 284 AD, Rome was in chaos. Civil wars, assassinations, economic collapse, and foreign invasions shattered the empire. Taking advantage of this turmoil, the Goths launched devastating raids across the Danube, even reaching as far as Greece and Asia Minor. In 251 AD, the Goths annihilated a Roman army at the Battle of Abritus, killing Emperor Decius, the first Roman emperor to fall in battle against a foreign enemy. Gothic warbands plundered major Roman cities, including Athens, Corinth, and Ephesus, though Rome managed to recover under Emperor Aurelian to 70 to 275 AD. The Goths had proven one thing: Rome was no longer invincible, a chain reaction that doomed Rome. As if the Gothic threat wasn't enough, a new terror emerged from the east: the Huns. These fierce nomadic warriors stormed into Europe around 375 AD, driving entire Germanic tribes into Roman lands. The Great Migration begins. The arrival of the Huns set off a domino effect that would ultimately bring down Rome. Fleeing from the unstoppable Hunnic horsemen, the Goths desperately sought refuge inside the Roman Empire. In 376 AD, the Visigoths, led by Fritigern, begged Rome for asylum. Emperor Valens agreed, but corrupt Roman officials mistreated them, starving them and exploiting them. Enraged, the Goths revolted, leading to the Battle of Adrianople 378 AD. This battle was a catastrophe for Rome. The Visigoths annihilated the Roman army and killed Emperor Valens. It was one of the worst defeats in Roman history, proving that the empire was no longer militarily superior. From this point forward, the Germanic tribes no longer saw Rome as an untouchable power. Instead, they saw it as a decaying giant, ripe for the taking. The sack of Rome for 10 AD, a moment that shook the world. For centuries, Rome had stood as the eternal city unconquered, unbreakable. But in 410 AD, the impossible happened. The city fell to a Germanic army. How Alaric and the Visigoths brought Rome to its knees. Alaric, a former Roman general and leader of the Visigoths, had once fought for Rome, but after being betrayed and denied land, he turned against his former masters. Leading his Visigothic warriors, he marched into Italy, demanding recognition and land for his people. Rome, weakened by internal strife, could not stop him. In 410 AD, Alaric's forces entered Rome and looted the city for 3 days. For the first time in 800 years, Rome had fallen to a foreign enemy. The psychological impact was immense. Even though the empire still existed, the illusion of its invincibility was shattered. The world realized Rome could be conquered. The Vandals and the final death blow for 55 AD. If Alaric's sack of Rome was shocking, what happened in 455 AD was even worse. Who were the Vandals? A fierce Germanic tribe. The Vandals had migrated across Europe, eventually settling in North Africa, where they established a powerful kingdom. Led by King Genseric, they built a navy and began raiding Roman territory. The second sack of Rome. In 455 AD, Genseric and his Vandals sailed across the Mediterranean and attacked Rome. This time, the destruction was even more severe than in 410 AD. The Vandals looted everything of value and stripped the city of its treasures. So complete was their devastation that even today, the term vandalism comes from this very event. For 76 AD, the Western Roman Empire falls. By the mid-5th century, Rome was a shell of its former self. Barbarian mercenaries filled the legions, emperors were mere puppets, and entire provinces had been lost. The rise of Odoacer. In 476 AD, a Germanic general named Odoacer deposed the last Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus. Instead of declaring himself emperor, he sent the imperial insignia to the Eastern Roman Emperor in Constantinople, symbolically ending the Western Roman Empire. No great battle, no climactic war. Rome simply ceased to exist. The rise of the Germanic kingdoms, a new Europe. With Rome gone, the Germanic tribes became the new rulers of Western Europe. The Visigoths ruled Spain. The Franks established the foundation of modern France under Clovis I. The Ostrogoths took Italy under Theodoric the Great. The Vandals controlled North Africa. What had begun as a series of border skirmishes centuries earlier had culminated in the complete transformation of Europe. The Germanic peoples, once feared as barbarians, had become the very architects of the medieval world. The legacy of the Germanic peoples. The fall of Rome was not just an end, it was a beginning. The Germanic tribes absorbed, transformed, and reshaped the remnants of Roman civilization, creating the foundations of medieval Europe. Rome had once viewed the Germanic peoples as mere savages, but in the end, it was these same barbarians who carried the legacy of Rome into a new era. From the ashes of an empire, new kingdoms were born, kingdoms that would eventually give rise to the nations of modern Europe. The Germanic peoples didn't just destroy Rome, they became its heirs.